All right, so today Rob Hegemann of the Institute of Pacific Islands Forestry will be presenting his research on long-term climate and streamflow data collection in the HETF. His research is being done through a permit with the HETF. Please note that permits are required when entering the HETF for research purposes. Rob, you can start whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Welcome everyone. I'm gonna start sharing my screen here. Can everyone see that?
We cannot see it, unfortunately.
Oh, okay. How about now?
Yep, we can see it.
Okay. So welcome everyone. Thanks for taking the time out of your day to attend my little talk on the long-term climate data and stream flow data collection in the Hawaiʻi Experimental Tropical Forest. I'm a hydrologist with the Forest Service here at the Institute of Pacific Islands Forestry. There we go. I'm in trouble advancing the slides. And here at IPIF, I'm in charge of managing the climate stations that are part of the Hawaii Permanent Plot Network, also known as HIPNet, as well as working with stream gauges that are installed along the Hamakua coast. And here's my email in case anyone would like to reach out with further questions in the future. I'd like to start with a little bit about the Hawaiʻi Experimental Tropical Forest, in case anyone on this talk isn't familiar with it. So the Hawaiʻi Experimental Tropical Forest has a nice website with a lot of backstory, which I'm not going to go in entirely today, but it's a cooperative collaboration between various groups that includes the Lapahoehoe wet forest as well as the Hu'uwa'awa'a dry forest on the west side of the island. And it has a goal of promoting research into biodiversity and conservation, and also enhancing ways for that research to get out to the communities that are present in the area. Well, not the only, but one of the principal ways that I'm part of HETF is through HIPNet, the Hawaii Permanent Plot Network. So the Hawaii Permanent Plot Network includes 4 forest plots that are set up, 2 on the east side of Hawaii Island and 2 on the west side, as part of the Center for Tropical Forest Science and Forest Global Earth Observatories network. And they've been established for a while with the purpose of collecting long-term climate and ecological data to track change throughout the island. If for those who are interested, you can visit this website for further information. So my involvement with HETF and HIPNet is with the climate stations that are associated with these permanent forest plots. Climate data is available from about 2010 through the present, still being collected daily, recording on a 5-minute interval and transmitted back here to the Forest Service office at the Institute of Pacific Islands Forestry every morning. We're currently collecting information on air temperature, relative humidity, rainfall, wind speed and direction, solar radiation, both downwelling and upwelling. So the radiation that's coming from the sun, as well as the radiation that's bouncing off of the ground and exiting the atmosphere. And then some of the stations are also recording soil moisture, soil temperature, and soil heat flux, which is basically the movement of heat through the soil, which tends to be entering the soil during the day when the sun is out and exiting the soil at night when the atmosphere is cooler. There's also a goal to integrate this data with the University of Hawaii's Hawaii Climate Data Portal in near real time. I think they're pulling in our data on a daily basis now, but hopefully it'll be available in near real time in the near future. And then in addition to the climate data that's being collected, 2 of the sites also have a canopy camera, which is known as a phenocam, which is taking regular photos of the forest canopy for research purposes, mainly in regards to phenology, which is the expression such as trees flowering at certain times of the year and tracking changes in that regular pattern over time.
Hey, Rob, this is Nick. Sorry to interrupt. Can you repeat that? What exits at night?
The
soil moisture?
Not possibly moisture as well, but the heat flux. Heat would be entering the soil
when the sun's shining.
When the sun is out, but then exiting from the soil at night when the atmosphere is cooler.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So I'd like to open a link to the Hawaii Climate Data Portal. And this is fairly new. They just had the inaugural rollout a few weeks ago. But they have data that's being pooled from several resources throughout the state and is publicly available for map generation and downloading data. And they've integrated rainfall, evapotranspiration, solar radiation, and they're working on pulling more and more data into this website with the idea of making it easily accessible for researchers, but then also for the general public to create a map of the local data available for their area. And then also the Phenocam network. I believe it's hosted by the University of New Hampshire, but it has several different collaborators. And then I would like to show you the Phenocam at Lapahoihoi. Clicking on the link to get the map overview, they have cameras throughout the globe, of which there are 15 in Hawaii. And then the Phenocam at Lapahoihoi. This was the most recent image taken at 11:52. So these images are taken regularly of the forest canopy from the climate tower at Lapahoihoi, with the idea that researchers will be able to track changes in phenology, such as when species flower or drop or gain leaves over time. And then there was recently installed another Phenocam associated with the HIPNet plot at Palamanui. So this is the dry forest, and you can see that it's quite a different view as from the PhenoCam, the canopy camera at Lapahoehoe. So here is an overview map of the climate stations that are associated with the HIPNet, the Hawaii Permanent Plot Network. There are 6 active stations. The first being at the Institute of Pacific Islands Forestry here in Hilo. The Spencer Station, which is at the HETF Learning Center in Lapahoehoe. There's Lapahoehoe Tower, Pu'uva'a Tower, Mamalahoa Station, and Palamanui Station. 2 of the stations have been discontinued, the Kiholo Station and the Hakalau Station. There's also a remote weather station at the Hakalau Fish and Wildlife Service facility. So it was semi-redundant, but the Hakalau station is actually at a lower elevation. So that one might be brought back online in the near future if funding allows, since it's in a slightly different climatic zone than the Fish and Wildlife Service Tower.
Hey, Rob, what was the reason for the Kiholo being discontinued? Was it lack of funding?
From what I understand, it was before my time, but vandalism. I think it was hard to keep that station operational because it kept getting vandalized.
Copy, thank you.
So 3 of these stations are within the HETF, the Hawaiʻi Experimental Tropical Forest, the Lapahoehoe Station, the Pu'uva'a Station, and the Mamalahoa Station. The Kiholo Station was part of the HETF before it was discontinued. And then while outside of the HETF, Spencer Station is at the Lapahoehoe Learning Center. This figure was borrowed from a colleague, Ryan Longman, and it does a really good example of showing the different elevations and geographic or profile distribution of the climate stations. The station here at the Institute of Pacific Islands Forestry is closer to sea level at about, or just over 300 feet above sea level. The Spencer Station at the Lapahoehoe Learning Center is a little higher in elevation. Lapahoehoe is higher yet. Hakalau was the highest elevation climate station. And then over on the west side, Pu'uva'a Tower is the highest, followed by Mamalahoa, a little lower in elevation. And then Palamanui is getting closer to sea level. And then Kiholo was right at sea level. And this dashed line here is the TWI, as known as labeled by the climate folks at Manoa, is the trade wind inversion. And that happens usually around this elevation of 2,000 and some meters. And that's a spot where clouds tend to build up a lot on the windward side, causing the rain shadow effect that the windward side experiences pretty frequently.
Hey, Rob, Nick again.
Yeah.
There seems, and I realize this is mostly a presentation on HIPNet and climate stations and all that kind of stuff, but it seems like there's an obvious gap above that trade wind inversion, both windward and leeward.
Yeah.
Do you have thoughts on that?
I would have to defer to Tom Giambaluca with Manoa. That gap is, yeah, definitely been well identified. I think a lot of it has been access and permitting issues, but I know that he has a plan to fill in this gap to the extent possible. He is, I think it was an NSF grant, if I'm not mistaken, but they applied for and successfully got funding to expand the climate network on the Big Island as well as throughout Hawaii. So I know that they're actively looking for how to fill in this glaring hole in the climate data coverage.
Thank you.
So I'd like to just show a little bit of what the climate stations and towers are like, especially focusing on the ones in the HETF. Pu'uwa'awa'a Tower, I believe, is a little over 80 feet in height. The sensors are up at the top, and then it's solar powered as it's pretty remote. And then down at the bottom, kind of hidden in this vegetation here, are these waterproof boxes that house the data logger platform, as well as the controls to convert power into usable form for the sensors. And then the battery is housed below that. This is views of the Lapahoihoi Tower. As you can see, the wet forest can be a lot more dense. This is the solar panel near the top of the tower, and it's pretty hard to see from the ground. But this is the view from the top of the tower, and this is the solar radiation sensor that's up at the top of the tower. So the top collects the solar radiation coming from the sun, and then these bottom two sensors collect radiation bouncing off the Earth's surface and heading back out. And this is Spencer Station out at Lapahoihoi Learning Center. And since it's a lot shorter in height, not only is it easier to work on, but it's also easier to point out the various different types of sensors. So this is the wind vane that collects both the wind speed with the velocity of the turning propeller and wind direction as the vane points with the wind, the changing wind direction. This is the rain gauge, also known as a tipping bucket. As the rain collects in the funnel, it causes a sort of seesaw mechanism in the sensor to flip, and that records a known quantity of rain that has fallen. And as it accumulates, it's recorded in the data logger. These two little cylinders here are joint sensors for temperature and relative humidity. This is the solar radiation sensor off on the right that collects the radiation coming from the sun, as well as the radiation bouncing off of the Earth's surface. And there's the solar panel, and it's really hard to see, but there's an antenna here. All of our stations are set up with cellular modems to relay the data back to the office here at the Institute of Pacific Islands Forestry. And then more recently, it's also being relayed to the University of Hawaii at Manoa for integration into their Hawaii climate data portal. And then many of you might also be aware, but the climate data for the stations that are within the Hawaiʻi Experimental Tropical Forest, a yearly summary is available in the annual reports. So I'll bring one of those up just quick to show an example. So on the HETF website, under documents and reports, there's the annual reports. So I'll pull up 2020. And each report includes summary data for the previous 5 years. So there's a little bit of a comparison with the backstory. But it's the annual rainfall, average temperature, and relative humidity. So you can see how it changes through the months, and then also variations from year to year. for each of the 3 sites that are within HETF: Lapahoihoi, Pu'uva'ava'a, and Mamalahoa. Then to switch gears rather abruptly, I'll continue the talking about the stream gauges. The stream gauges were installed throughout 2011 and 2012 along the Hamakua coast, with the idea being that as the rainfall changes significantly from Hilo heading north, it could be an analog for future climate change, disrupting rainfall patterns in Hawaii in the future. The gauges make use of a Hobo U20 logger, which is recording pressure, which is essentially the weight of the water above the sensor. These loggers are about the size of a cigar, and they're housed within between a 2-foot and 3-foot section of galvanized pipe that's anchored to bedrock in these streams. The plan is to model data gaps that have occurred within this period to get a 10-year data set that will be useful for future research projects. And in addition to these loggers, turbidity sensors were deployed at some of the locations in previous years before they were unfortunately taken out by Tropical Storm Lane in 2018. We're looking to reinstall those as funding allows, and then also to expand to the West Hawaii Island in the future in collaboration with the South Kohala Coastal Partnership, of which the Nature Conservancy is part of. And they invited us in, essentially. I'd like to bring up the South Kohala website just to talk about it briefly. It's another collaborative group, not unlike the Hawaiʻi Experimental Tropical Forest, bringing together various landowners and agencies, but they're looking at a ridge to reef situation on the watershed level about how sediment transport, whether it be from landscape degradation or fire or other sources, that ends up impacting the coral reef. So they're looking to collect data as well as do watershed restoration projects. And they were hoping to bring us in as partners to help collect data, mostly stream flow and turbidity, on some of these ephemeral and intermittent streams in the South Kohala area. So here is an overview map of the stream gauge locations that the Institute of Pacific Islands Forestry operates. There are 11, starting out just outside of Hilo. The closest one to the office is tributary to the Pohoihoi stream. Then we have Kapue stream, Kolekole stream, which is just upstream of Akaka Falls State Park. Then we have Umama stream, Mauna Loa stream, Waikamalo stream, Makahiloa stream, Ahale stream, Kaiwihi Lahi Lahi stream, Menawaiʻopai stream, and Kawaliʻi stream. Of these, Kaiwi Lahi Lahi is in the Hawaiʻi Experimental Tropical Forest, and the Menawaiʻopai stream gauge location here is at the Lapahoihoi Learning Center. And as I mentioned before, the average rainfall decreases quite a bit as you continue northwest. And the idea is that these are at a similar elevation and similar bedrock type and plant communities. So with rainfall being the most significant variable that this could be a model for future climate change, anticipating a drier general environment for Hawaii Island. So this is Kaiwilahilahi stream, and these photos were taken at 2 different times of the year. So Kaiwilahilahi stream is probably on the edge of whether it could be classified as intermittent or ephemeral. But to simplify, those terms basically mean that it does not have consistent flowing water throughout the entire year. It flows during rainfall events and then for a limited period after rainfall. So this is it's kind of hard to see, but this is the stream gauge, that section of galvanized pipe that is anchored to the bedrock. And then it has that cigar-shaped logger is suspended via cable within the pipe. And it's recording the weight of the water above. And that pressure of the water is adjusted for atmospheric pressure to give a height of water above the sensor. And then that gets converted into the amount of water flowing past the sensor. This is Manawaiʻopai stream, which is at the Lapahoihoi Learning Center. Similar setup. Unfortunately, the bedrock is not as vertical, so this one is installed at more of an angle, which is less ideal. And then Umauma and Kapue stream are not within the Hawaiʻi Experimental Tropical Forest, but these are other examples of stream gauges. This one has a staff gauge right next to it. So this is a very low-tech way of measuring how much water is coming through it. Basically a ruler bolted to the bedrock. But this can be a good reference in case the logger fails as to what the stream conditions were at the point of the visit. So the idea is to get our stream gauges closer to the level of a USGS stream gauge by adding cell phone telemetry and having that data available on a public-facing website in near real-time availability. But we're not there yet. So in the meantime, I was going to show USGS Honolulu stream gauge as an idea of what we're hoping to have in the near future. So this is the stream flow at Honolulu for the past few days. The USGS site is pretty convenient, and then you can select dates, so we can do all of March to date. And we can see that there's been a few days where the rains have brought stream flow significantly higher than normal flows. And then this is the direct sensor reading. So this would be the information that we get at IPIF when we download our stream loggers, basically just the feet of water above the sensor. Behind the scenes, there is an equation based on physical measurements of flow when we go to the field. And that equation takes this feet of water and translates it into cubic feet of water per second going through the stream. So in the future, we're hoping to upgrade our cigar-shaped pressure transducer standalone loggers into telemetered sensors, which will transmit this data to a website hosted by Onset, the manufacturer of the loggers, so that this data will be available in near real time. Not quite as smoothly and efficiently as the USGS does it, but it'll be more user-friendly than our current setup. So I'd like to just make a few closing points. Why do we collect long-term data? Probably the biggest one is that around 10 years of data is needed to overcome bias and year-to-year variability. You can't really figure out a trend one way or the other if you have one wet year or one dry year. It could be an outlier. However, if you have 10 years of data that show a consistent trend towards being wetter or drier, that starts to be statistically relevant. It's also important for the tracking of changes in climate. I think in general, there can be a really big misunderstanding of differences between weather and climate, and that climate is not just a single point in time or a single season. It's a much bigger picture sort of thing. It's important to collect long-term data because it can really help with understanding changes in plant and animal communities over time. And then another one is that it's a really important resource for planning for the future. With climate change, we're going to need data for coastal resilience, infrastructure such as bridges, for planning on how high these bridges need to be to account for flooding in streams, for tidal surges and such. And there are probably many others that I failed to think of, but I just wanted to pitch for why it's important to collect long-term data, even though it can be very costly, time-consuming, and it's not as exciting as pinpointed research projects can be. And with that, I'd like to wrap up by saying thank you to everyone for taking time out of your day to attend this talk, and I appreciate it. And if there are any questions, I think we have plenty of time.
Hi, this is Peter. I had a question.
Hi, Peter.
Hi, about the, would it be possible to incorporate some of the other fire cams into your canopy monitoring? For example, near our house, we have the KOKO fire camera that's maintained by Nature Conservancy with the National Park, I guess. So I know there's there's other towers around the island, and I just was wondering if you had an idea of incorporating all the different towers and all the different agencies, more into a global perspective, I guess.
Yeah, that would be good. Let me, I know that there's quite a few other cameras that aren't part of the HETF that are in the PhenoCam network. I know that the PhenoCam network specifically, because they're looking at phenology, they have some, I guess, more stringent requirements as to the setup, that they would prefer that it be pointed at a specific angle relative to north to reduce glare, and they'd like to have I think it's either like a white or a gray object in frame to help equalize color reference and things like that. But yeah, I think it would be really good if there were a way to pool all of the availability into a central location if there were a way to
Well, that's
maybe not.
an example of a camera, and I know there's lots of weather stations all over the island that measure humidity and rainfall and all those things.
Yeah,
Those are, I don't know, some of them are privately maintained. Like some friends I know in Ocean View, they just have their own weather station. And a climate scientist, Andreas Flitch, looks at those, you know, all the way from the ocean to the top of Mauna Loa as part of his microclimate research. So I don't know how I guess what I'm saying is there are different organizations and people that are accumulating data, and it'd be nice if it were all collected together somehow through one agency. Maybe that's the one in Hawaii that you were talking about.
yeah,
in Oahu.
yeah. I think Tom Jambaluka's vision for the Hawaii Climate Data Portal is to integrate as many sources of climate data as possible for the state into this platform, and then make that publicly available to anyone who's interested.
Yeah, great.
I'm not sure if he's aware of these smaller micro stations or not, though.
Well, it's so easy to do now that a lot of people just go out and buy one. And of course, in the case of Andreas, he's also monitoring in the lava tubes various, you know, climate data.
Oh,
which is can be interesting because it kind of integrates over longer time periods.
yeah.
And can I ask one other question? Where in Puawa is the tower? I go there all the time, but I don't recall seeing it.
It's actually up in the bird sanctuary area.
In the middle or?
Towards the top.
Well,
I actually have not been there very frequently myself because it's rather hard to get to.
Right. That's an area that, well, I go there to the top of the bird sanctuary, but I go right in the middle. So, yeah. Yeah, and it's fun. It's fun, kind of scary drive to get up there.
Yeah. Yeah, unfortunately, the last time I was out there, we were unsuccessful in getting into the tower because it had rained and the grass was super wet and slick. So we did not have enough traction to make it up.
Okay. Well, anyway, the road is clear right now. I was just up there a couple of weeks ago. So.
Oh, that's good to know.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anyway, I really enjoyed your talk, so thank you very much.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rob. That was an awesome talk. Does anyone else have any other questions? All right, and with that, I think we will conclude the webinar.